David is one of the bravest, strongest characters I have ever met. He is a man of few words, so it falls to me to tell his remarkable story. Let me tell you from the outset, I forgive you in advance if you don't believe me, but I swear on my grandfather's grave it's true. Okay, so he isn't dead yet, but you know what I mean. I've cobbled the story together from interviews with his wife, friends, and other townsfolk. I'm Mark, by the way, a reporter with the Houston Tribune. You'll notice that I didn't list David himself as a source of information. The reason for that is I only got him to speak to me once, and then all he said was, "My dad once told me, don't have anything to do, do nothing. Don't have anything to say nothing." That's all I did. I have enough material, and it is bizarre enough that I've decided to write a book. It will be as much about small-town dynamics as about infidelity and the actions of a remarkable man, a man of average intelligence who, when faced with the choices that the modern court system would give him, decided to fight back in his own way. For fairness, I should point out that this is my interpretation. As I said, David doesn't talk much. My main source was his wife. She talked like a canary, mainly, I think, for my promise of a couple of $1,000. She needed that to help with her legal bills. A little scene setting is in order at this point. At the beginning of this story, David and his wife lived in an isolated town of about 25,000 people with their 3 children. Sarah, 16, Jake, 15, and Liam, 13. David is a mechanic. His wife works for the biggest fish in their small pond. The man is an old-fashioned bully who owns the town's biggest car dealership. Everyone knows that the town's long-serving mayor is retiring next year, and our man is the leading contender to replace him, leading because all the other declared candidates withdrew their interest, citing personal reasons. Like I said, he's an old-style bully. The town has its own newspaper that until very recently showed absolutely no interest in the story of David and his wife. What can I say? The owner of the paper drives a car with a certain dealership sticker on the back window. I, on the other hand, work for a major newspaper based in the state capital. I was bullied at school, so even if this wasn't a great story, I would have tried to get involved in David's fight against Goliath anyway. Enough dribbling on with the story. Jessica screamed into the pillow under her face as the man above her unloaded into her. She was glad of that pillow. Faking the facial expressions as well would have been a task her acting skills just weren't up to. As she struggled to breathe under Sean's relaxed weight above her, she thought it hadn't always been like that. At the beginning of their relationship, the newness and the forbidden excitement of it all had resulted in genuine pleasure. Now, the familiarity of it all, the lack of romance, and the guilt robbed her of the sexual relief she craved. Sean was a fair enough lover with more than adequate equipment, but an hour snatched in a seedy motel just didn't do it for her. When she decided to start her affair 6 months ago, she dreamed that big, powerful Sean had a big, powerful tool, but it was so close to her husband David's in size that she couldn't tell the difference. At first, the novelty of it all had made it differently exciting, but without the long romantic buildup that late 30 SS women crave, the physical intimacy became mechanical. That would change, she knew. Sean was going places, and she intended to be there when he arrived there for the romantic dinners and the all-night love sessions she craved. She knew she didn't love Sean, but that was fine because she didn't love David either. It was enough for her to know that Sean loved her, and she reasoned she would come to love him in time. Only 3 things impinged on her perfect plans. One was her own guilt. Her strict Christian parents would never approve of her behavior and what she was doing and intended to do to David. She wasn't looking forward to that conversation with her husband. Although she didn't love him, she did respect him as a loyal, hard-working man trying to do the best for his family. It was just too bad that his best wasn't good enough for Jessica. Although the conversation was still a year away, she already dreaded it. The second was that Sean refused to divorce his frigid wife until he was actually elected mayor. That condemned her to occasional hurried motel liaisons rather than all-night sessions following a romantic date. Back in the present, as her sexual heat began to fade, her guilt started to build. Sean rolled off her and started to get dressed. As usual, she would take a shower and leave at least an hour after him. That way, no one would see them leave together or arrive back at work together. Sean finished dressing and kissed her goodbye. Before he opened the door, she reminded him, "Look out the window and make sure there's no one we know around." Sean obediently opened the curtains and glanced out, but suddenly drew back and let the curtain fall. "Hey, Jessica, there's a guy sitting on the hood of your car. He saw me open the curtain and looked at me." "What the hell?" Jessica jumped out of bed and opened the curtain a crack to peer surreptitiously out. "That's David, your husband?" "Yes. How the heck did he know I was here?" "I'm not ready for that conversation yet, Sean. This could wreck our plans." "How? What's he going to do?" "No divorce lawyer in this town is going to take his case. I'll word them up this afternoon, but he could go to the media." Sean laughed. "In this town? I don't think so. They're too smart to publish anything bad about me. They know I'll own this town for the next 10 years or until I make a run for state politics. Don't worry about them. Anyway, this could be good. You're always saying we never get enough time together. Now he knows. That could change. What's he going to do about it? I mean, look at the guy. He's half a foot shorter than me and about half my weight. He could tell your wife." "You're right there. I don't want the witch tipped off before we're ready. Tell you what, I'll go and have a talk to him." Sean bent down to kiss her again and marched out of the door. Jessica cracked the curtains again to see the confrontation. She looked straight into the eyes of her husband. Letting the curtain drop, she felt guilt eating at her. She waited a couple of minutes until she heard Sean's raised voice, then cracked the curtain again. What she saw was very upsetting. Sean was leaning over David, who still sat on her car. Once again, their eyes locked through the curtain. Jessica fled to the bathroom and showered until the water ran cold. Still, she hadn't managed to wash her guilt away. She was dressed and steeling herself to look out the window again when Sean rang. "How quickly did hubby leave after I had words with him?" "I don't know. I haven't looked since you left." With Sean bolstering her courage, Jessica looked out the cracked curtain again. He's still there. Sean was confused. His standover tactics always worked. Like most bullies, he only had one tactic. "What did you say to him?" "I just told him the facts of life and pointed out the health hazards of standing in our way and the futility of trying to do anything about it." "What am I going to do? I can't leave with him out there." "You'll be fine, Jessica. It'll be dark in an hour. Stay where you are, and I'll send a couple of our associates around to have a word with him." True to his word, an hour later, there was a heavy knock on her door. Jessica looked out and saw Rick and Tom, two of Sean's employees, outside the door holding David between them. They were so big that David's feet were off the ground. She opened the door, and they shuffled in. David had a neutral expression and just stared at Jessica. She quickly averted her eyes and made for the door when she heard a sickening thud behind her and an expulsion of breath. It was pure reflex to look. She saw Tom holding David and Rick with his fist cocked again. As she looked, David stood up straight again and looked her directly in the eye. Feeling sick, Jessica fled. She picked up some takeout on the way home to feed her family. She fielded questions on where their dad was and why he wasn't answering their phone calls. She slept extremely poorly, and there was still no sign of her husband when she left for work the next day. Sean wasn't in that day either, and she couldn't bring herself to speak to Rick or Tom. With extreme trepidation, Jessica returned home just after her usual time to an empty house. She rang Sarah and Jake, but both cells went straight to voicemail. Jessica began to fret. It was well after dinner time when she heard a car in the driveway. Looking out the window, she saw her kids getting out of her parents' car with both her mom and dad. They trooped in. Her mother opened the conversation. "Jessica, why didn't you tell us David was in the hospital?" Two didn't know. Silence settled on the room. Everyone stared at Jessica. Finally, her father broke it. "Maybe you didn't know, but the fact that you're not rushing over there or even curious about why he's there tells me it's no surprise to you." Faced with this logic and 5 suddenly accusing stares, Jessica could only slump into a chair and avert her eyes. She might as well have screamed, "Guilty!" After another minute's silence, she fled to her room. She heard her parents making dinner for her children. Her mother tried to get her to come out of the locked room, but Jessica couldn't face that. Eventually, when all was silent downstairs, she ventured out. The hum of her children's conversation abruptly stopped when she entered the room. "Have you all eaten dinner?" Her children just stared silently at her. Finally, Sarah broke it. "Mom, you know how Daddy got hurt, don't you? I had no idea he was in the hospital." Silence returned as everyone, except maybe little Liam, accepted that the lack of a denial was as good as an admission. This time it was broken by Liam's sobs. Jessica hurried over and wrapped her arms around him. "What's wrong, sweetie? It hurt me to see Daddy hurt so much. He's got broken ribs, a broken nose, and 2 black eyes." Jessica recoiled in horror at what she'd not prevented. Jake filled the ensuing silence. "Why did you hurt Daddy, Mom? What did he do to you?" Jessica's answer was pure reflex. "He didn't do anything to me." Too slowly, she realized that once again she'd failed to deny being the one that hurt David. In her own mind, she blamed herself. She shepherded the children to bed and basically drank herself unconscious. The next day, Sean refused to discuss David at work, but offered to discuss it at their usual motel later. Frustrated, Jessica agreed. As soon as she got there, he tried to fondle her, but she snapped at him until he stopped. He just shrugged his shoulders when she asked him what instructions he'd given his 2 thugs. When she described David's injuries, Sean showed no interest or empathy at all. She stormed out and arrived back at the office 2 minutes before him. The tension between them for the rest of the day was obvious to everyone within 100 yards. That night, she didn't fret when her children weren't home before her again. Her parents dropped them off, but as soon as they smelled dinner cooking, they left without a word. All the children gave monosyllabic answers to any question she asked. Whenever she entered the room they were in, conversation ceased. The next day, things were still frosty at work and very uncomfortable at her empty home. That night, she just sat at the kitchen table and pondered how to break the impasse with her children. She was so deep in thought that she hardly registered her children returning. And when no dinner was present, Sarah and Jake prepared a meal around her. She only snapped out of it when Sarah noisily put a plate in front of her. She ate alone in the kitchen while the children ate in front of the TV. She just couldn't handle those accusing stares. She shuddered to think what David was filling their heads with. After another cold day at work, she returned home to a bustling house. Her mother greeted her at the door. "Are you going to feed your children today?" "Of course, Mother." "Good." Her mother interrupted and left the house. Jessica turned to see Liam carrying a plate of cheese and biscuits up the stairs. "Hey, no food upstairs, you know that." "Daddy's hungry." Liam threw over his shoulder as he kept on up the stairs. That's how Jessica discovered David was home. She busied herself making dinner, occasionally glancing at the stairs. It was only 13 steps, but it was a psychological chasm. At any one time, 1 or 2 of the children were upstairs. Sarah took David's food up. As they sat at the dining table, Liam innocently asked, "If Daddy didn't do anything to you, why did you hurt him? Why won't you talk to him?" Jessica had no answer to that. When Sarah started to explain the concept of guilt to Liam, she fled, leaving a half-eaten dinner. Jessica walked for several hours. When she returned, all the kids were in bed. She needed stuff from the master bedroom and bathroom, so she snuck upstairs and peered in the open door. David appeared to be asleep on his side, facing the doorway. The sight of his swollen face with white strips holding his nose in place bypassed everything and went straight to her conscience. The sound of ragged breathing just about killed her. Jessica gathered her necessities as quietly as possible and went to put them in the spare room directly across the hall. She returned to the master bedroom with the intent of whispering a request for forgiveness to the man she'd once loved, a man whose current mental and physical pain she could have prevented. As she knelt down next to the bed, she saw his eyes were open and staring at her. She fled again that night and again couldn't sleep. Through 2 walls in a corridor, she felt David's eyes boring into her. When her relationship with Sean first turned serious, she knew conflict with David was inevitable. She'd gone over and over in her head what she would say to David. Now that it had turned from an academic exercise to reality, It hit harder than she'd ever imagined. Jessica forced Sean to talk to her the next morning and tried to get him to advance his plans to divorce his wife. He was adamant that until after the election there would be no divorce and no admitting to an affair. If she wanted to divorce her husband now, it was up to her. He would assist her with time off and money, but essentially she was on her own. That's when Jessica first suspected that she might just be a distraction for Sean. Although she was far from convinced, the heat from the burning bridge behind her forced her to follow her chosen path. She took time off to see a lawyer and arranged to have David served as soon as the papers were ready. She left the service all in the hands of the lawyer to expedite the divorce. She kept her demands reasonable, her having primary custody, but with liberal visitation rights for him, and the formulated child support and alimony. She also wanted residency of the house until she was ready to move out. That should be just after the election next year. The next part of the story won't make sense unless you know the layout of the dealership that Sean owns and Jessica works at. The front of the building is a huge showroom. Along the wall at the back are 4 glass-walled offices, end-to-end with solid walls between them. On the far right is Sean's, then Jessica's, then the 2 belonging to the admin manager and the service manager. As the offices are long and thin, there is only one place to put a desk at the opposite end to the door, against the end wall. Because Sean's and Jessica's doors are at opposite ends of their offices, this means their desks are basically together with a solid wall between them. The service center is around the back, and Jessica didn't see David walk into the dealership. She was busy tapping away at a keyboard. In he did walk, though, right up to the reception desk. He leaned on it and just stared right into Jessica's window. One of the 2 receptionists recognized him. He'd coached her softball team in high school. She knew he was Jessica's husband, although he'd never been there before. She tried to engage him in conversation, but he just stared neutrally at the offices. The receptionist couldn't see if it was Jessica or Sean that was the target. While she kept talking, the other girl who shared the front desk went to Jessica's office and told her David was there. Jessica's head swung around. From her vantage point, there was no doubt where David's eyes were focused. They bored into hers even from a distance of 12 feet. Jessica quickly broke eye contact. Still, she felt his gaze on her. Without looking, she reached for the Venetian blind control and twisted it so he couldn't see her now. A minute later, she put one finger between 2 slats and peeked out. Both the girls at reception were whispering to each other conspiratorially. David was still staring at her window with his now familiar neutral expression playing through the bruises and bandages. With his stare burning through the blinds, Jessica picked up the phone and rang Sean. She told him to look out his window. "What's he doing here?" "I don't know, Sean. Get rid of him. It hurts." Sean put the phone down and strode out to the reception desk. "Mr. Miller, this is a private business. I'm going to have to ask you to leave." David didn't acknowledge Sean in any way, shape, or form. He just kept staring. "Come on, don't make me call the police." Without taking his eyes off Jessica's window, David reached into his pocket and handed his phone to Sean. Sean lowered his voice to a level he thought was audible only to the starer. "Listen, so I slept with your wife. Get over it." The trouble was, Sean had no idea of the power of his own voice. Both girls at the desk heard his comment clearly. In her office, Jessica, peeking through a crack in the Venetians, saw both heads swing towards her. She then saw Sean stride back to his office. 2 minutes later, she heard a commotion at reception. She created another crack and looked out. What she saw horrified her. Rick and Tom had David by an arm each and were carrying him towards the outer doors. David was traveling backward and stared at her the entire trip. Out of sight, Jessica thought to herself, serves him right. Why can't he just let me go? Then she remembered that all her dialogues with David to date had been in her head. Until he'd caught her in the motel with Sean, he had no idea that their marriage was even in trouble. With that amount of shock, it was no wonder he was at a loss for words. She wasn't totally devoid of empathy, and she genuinely felt for David. Jessica raced to her door and exited her office. She saw Sean with a sadistic grin on his face. "No, Sean, no, not again. Jessica, let me handle it, woman." With this statement, Sean gestured with his head for Jessica to return to her office. She opened the blinds again and stewed. Sean canceled his afternoon appointments and just stayed in his office. Jessica noted that there was a constant stream of employees hitting reception, and many small clusters formed and dispersed. She distracted herself from wondering what that was all about. At 1 p.m., 2 policemen arrived and spoke to the receptionist. Sean must have seen them. They were invited to his office. The blinds were closed. Then they left. Jessica was dreading going home. So before she left, she asked if she could move into the motel unit the company rented permanently, the same unit she and Sean used. She snuck home before the kids got back from school and packed a suitcase. Then she sent a text to David and Sarah's phone saying she wouldn't be home. At the end of the day, Sean helped her unpack in the unit. Desperate for distraction, she allowed him to have a physical relationship with her. At 6:30 p.m., her mother rang. Before she answered, Jessica thought, typical of David to use her own family against her. "Where the hell are you, Jessica? Why aren't you home to feed your kids?" I'm not coming home tonight. David can look after them. David is in the hospital again. He'll be there for at least a week this time." "What?" "I'll be home as quick as I can." Jessica pushed Sean off. "What did you do to him this time?" "The stubborn prick has to learn that he can't mess with me, Jessica." Jessica dressed quickly and sprinted home, picking up takeout on the way. The first thing she noted when she threw her front door open was all 3 children sobbing in the lounge, being comforted by her parents. Her mother intercepted her and led her into the kitchen. "What the hell is going on, Jessica? You abandon our children while your husband is in the ICU?" Jessica watched her mother's nostrils flare. "Then you come home with grease for your children's main meal of the day. What is going on, Jessica?" "It's none of your business, Mother. David and I are going through a rough spot at the moment, that's all." The 2 women stared each other down for half a minute. Her mother broke the silence first. "I note that you showed no surprise when you found out your husband is in the hospital. That tells me that what the children say is true. You did have something to do with David ending up in the ICU." "No, Mom. I had no idea David was in the hospital again." Silence settled over the conversation again. Again, it was broken by Jessica's mother. Well, what? Aren't you a little curious what your boyfriend did to your husband this time?" "What boyfriend?" "Come on, Jessica, you reek of sex." Jessica looked at the floor and remained silent. "Well, seeing as how you were so interested, I'll tell you. This time the doctors are fairly certain he has a fractured cheekbone and possibly a fractured skull as well. They are sure that one of the ribs that were broken last time was pushed into his chest this time and punctured a lung. The ambulance driver told me they picked him up from an alley near your work. Tell me, Jessica, what did the poor guy do to you to deserve this treatment?" Jessica couldn't answer. She was too busy sobbing. Her mother sat in silence until Jessica ran upstairs to her bedroom. She noticed there was blood on the sheets of the bed she hadn't slept in for 4 days. She screamed her hurt into the pillow. She had no idea how long she stayed there, but finally there was a soft knock at the door. It was her mother. "I have to take Dad home. All this stress is causing his blood pressure problems to come back. He almost fainted when he stood up just now." "Okay, Mom, I'll see you out." By the time Jessica got downstairs, her father was walking out the front door. He turned to give her a withering look, but didn't say anything. While she was saying goodbye, the children slipped off to bed. Jessica sat and tried to think of a way out of this train wreck. The only way she could see was forward. Breakfast the next day was silent. When she got to work, Jessica discovered Sean would be gone for the day. She desperately needed reassurance that at least the future side of her plan was on track, so she texted Sean and begged him to meet her at the motel that evening. She then texted her mother and asked her to meet the kids after school and look after their dinner as she had things to do. The reply was, "Yes, good idea." Sean met her after work and reassured her their plan was right on track. The police couldn't connect either of them to David's 2 beatings. He didn't bring up the subject of her husband's second assault. Sure, Sean had arranged it, but she could have stopped it simply by running after them as her husband was carried out the door. She allowed Sean to be with her until after 9 p.m. Then Jessica showered and went home. Although it was almost 10 when she arrived, all 3 children were awake and looking at her expectantly. "Why aren't you guys in bed?" her mother replied on their behalf. "I let them stay up until you got home. They're keen to know how their father is." 3 don't know. "What, didn't you go and see him tonight?" Jessica's silence answered for her. "So, what did you do?" "Surely not." "Tell me you didn't get me to cover you here while you went to see your lover while David is in the hospital." "I never told you I was going to the hospital." Her mother swung around, grabbed her coat, and headed for the door. With one hand on the handle, she threw over her shoulder, "You disgust me. I'm ashamed to call you my daughter. Don't ask me to look after your children again unless it's so you can go to your husband and beg his forgiveness." Jessica thought she was learning to cope with 3 hours of broken sleep at night. Like I said, I never got to know David, but from how other people describe him, he maybe would have forgiven Jessica up to this point if she had just abandoned her plans. She didn't. From what she told me later, she thought she caused so much pain at that point that backing out would have made it all pointless. When Jessica's mother rang her at work the next day, she thought it might be to apologize. It wasn't. "Jessica, how could you be that heartless?" "What are you talking about, Mom? Your husband finally gets out of the ICU, and what does he get? A visit from his loving wife? No, he gets an ugly process server and divorce papers. Who are you, Jessica? What have you done with my daughter?" In her pain, Jessica had totally forgotten that her divorce process was on autopilot. The lawyer had obviously followed her instructions and had David served as soon as the papers were ready. As a reflex, she tried to remove the immediate thorn in her side. "Mom, can you look after the kids tonight so I can go and see David?" "No, I bloody can't, Jessica. Your father is in the same hospital as your husband. He had a heart attack today. They're going to put in stents tomorrow. Goodbye, Jessica." Jessica rushed home early to be there when the children got off the school bus. The bus arrived devoid of 3 familiar faces. Again, calls to 2 of their phones went straight to voicemail. 2 hours later, she got a text to pick them up at the hospital. They'd all walked there after school. On the way home, she scolded them for making her worry. They all just remained silent and stared out the car window. It was shortly after this that I became aware of the tragic story of Jessica, David, and Sean. I was sitting in my office wondering where my next story was going to come from. The world was going through an unusually quiet, peaceful period, and news was hard to find. My phone rang. It was an old mate I'd gone to journalism school with, Matt Johnson. He was good at what he did, but tended to shun the bigger organizations to concentrate on small-town issues where he could make a difference. He'd been in the regional center where our story occurred for about a year. The doctors and nurses at the hospital where David was being treated were so appalled by his wife's behavior that they contacted Matt. With his normal talent, Matt quickly spoke to several people from the dealership and found out about Jessica and Sean's affair in addition to the 2 beatings David had suffered. No one came out and directly said it, but the fact that David was seen by 3 witnesses being carried out of the dealership by 2 known associates of Sean led to its own conclusion. Matt tried to talk to David, but he refused to speak. He then contacted the police to see where their investigation was at, only to be told there was no active investigation on the matter. He submitted the story to his editor and had the pleasure of seeing it torn up in his face. No negative stories would be published about Sean in that town. He immediately resigned and sent the story to me. I saw my editor, and Matt received an offer from my paper. The next week, I cleared my desk and left for an assignment in Centerville 2 days later. From what Jessica told me, the next week was a very uncomfortable one for her. Her children treated her like a leper, and her social life was curtailed by not having her mother available to look after the children. She picked them up from the hospital every night. Sean was away on business every day during business hours, and the only time she saw him was one night when he managed to sneak into her house after the children were in bed. That was the first time they spent the whole night together. She certainly craved the company. On Friday, Jessica got a call from the school to come in for a semi-urgent discussion. That was when she found out that they were very worried about Sarah's rapid weight loss and couldn't believe she'd been so negligent not to notice. They moved on to tell of Jake's sudden propensity for violence and that little Liam was being bullied because he was always crying. Jessica cried herself at that. All she could think to do was advance the divorce as quickly as possible and hope it blew over. At first, Jessica turned down the invitation to go out with 4 of her girlfriends that Friday night. David was still in the hospital and Sean was unavailable. She tried everything she could to get the children to speak, but failed. In frustration, she left the children at home and went out with the girls. She left the name of the place she would be with Sarah in case it was too loud to hear her cell ringing. She'd been there about an hour, fielding questions from her friends that had heard the rumors, denying all knowledge of the violence visited on her husband. They'd finally relented and moved on to more fun topics when she saw 2 of them looking over her shoulder. She turned around, and there was David. One eye was slightly black, the other jet black. A bandage covered one side of his face below the eye, and he was stooped, guarding his painful ribs. He was sitting at an adjacent table just staring at her. In panic, Jessica swung around back to her friends and totally blew it. "Oh, ignore him." Her friends saw her immediate facial reaction and heard her flippant comment. They also saw David suffering and could only wonder at the commitment it must have taken to come there and make his silent protest. For that, it clearly was. They made up their own minds on Jessica's honesty over the last hour. One made an excuse to go to the bar. The 2 that knew David the best went over to talk to him. The 4 just looked at Jessica quizzically. Jessica fled again. She paused outside the bar, wondering if she should offer David a lift. Her own conscience wouldn't allow her to talk to him yet, though. Even though it was the decent thing to do, she just couldn't do it. As late as 2 weeks ago, she told the guy she loved him to divert any suspicion. He now knew it had been a lie. Jessica drove home. Her mother was there looking after the kids. They hadn't seen each other in a week, and Jessica suddenly realized she'd never even inquired about her father's health. God, how self-centered had she become? They both got the kids to bed. Then Jessica asked about her father, but tried to change the topic when her mother raised the thorny issue of David. Her mother was having none of that, though. She asked Jessica if David had done anything to warrant her divorcing him. Jessica mentioned a couple of petty little niggles, but when she saw her mother was unconvinced, she went on to explain that she'd simply fallen out of love with her husband and in love with someone else. She found lying to her mother easy. She certainly wasn't going to mention that she used Sean's attention to her as an opportunity to trade up, as it were. The older generation woman let her daughter have it on her opinions about abandoning her marriage and children. No holds were barred. Jessica sat through it uncomfortably. She vehemently denied having anything to do with David's 2 beatings. At the end, she didn't ask whether or not her mother had discussed with her husband if he would forgive her for the attack on their marriage. In her mind, the plan was intact. She did ask if David was coming home that night and was coldly told that he was due to be released in 2 days, but had rung asking where she was earlier. She realized that David must have snuck out of the hospital to go to the bar earlier. Jessica did a lot of thinking in the next 2 days. She decided that the decent thing to do was apologize to David for her infidelity, but to point out that the beatings were the result of his own immature behavior. She would demand that he spoke to the children and explained that she had nothing to do with his pain. She thought there was a reasonable chance he would go along with that, and a small chance he'd beg her to stay. One thing was for sure, any aggression on his part would result in threats of a reduced share of the marital assets in the split. David had other plans. On the night he was released from the hospital, Jessica and Sean left work early and went to the unit. With no need for secrecy, they both walked out of the room together just after 6 p.m. to be greeted by a silent David, Sarah, Jake, and Liam watching them from where they stood across the parking lot. Sean immediately strode towards them. All 3 children stepped in front of David. David said something Jessica couldn't hear, then stepped in front of them protectively. Sean looked at the three witnesses, turned and strode away. Jessica slunk to her car and drove away. David took the kids out for a meal and returned to his home with them just before 8. Jessica heard them come in laughing and talking. She kept washing her dinner dishes. When she'd finished, she went into the lounge, meaning to separate David from the kids and present her ultimatum. The three children stopped talking when she entered. There was no sign of David. When she inquired where he was, she was told that he'd taken his pain medicine and gone to bed. She tried in vain to get the kids to talk to her normally. That failed. She shepherded them to bed and rang Sean for comfort. Exhausted, she decided to turn in early as well. At the top landing of the stairs, she saw the light was on in the spare room and that there was a pile of her clothes and her toiletries on the bed. Vowing that this had to stop now, she strode to the master bedroom door. It was locked. Going back downstairs, she retrieved the spare key from the kitchen, thinking how David was behaving totally unlike the man she knew. She armed herself with a rolling pin for self-defense, just in case. Using the key, she opened the bedroom door. The light from the hallway revealed David on the bed in a sleeping bag on a mattress. As she was processing the sight, the form in the bag arose to reveal Jake standing between her and David. Jake looked at the rolling pin, then hissed forcefully, "You will not hurt my dad again." Jessica wanted to say it was all a mistake, that she wouldn't ever hurt David. In Jake's eyes, she saw the futility of this. Instead, she retreated, weeping, to her room. Did she sleep like a baby that night? What do you reckon? David was still unconscious when it was time to leave the next morning. The kids took turns. Two would be eating breakfast in the kitchen. The other would be sitting halfway up the stairs. It was so obvious that this one was a guard that it broke Jessica's heart. She left and spent the day planning a speech on how to redeem her children's trust. She returned home at her usual time. David and the children were talking in the lounge. She barked at the kids to go into the kitchen. They looked at David, who nodded. When he painfully started to rise, she ordered him to stay away. Once the three children were settled at the kitchen table, Jessica stood glaring down at them, facing the door, the table between her and it. She opened her mouth to begin her prepared speech when she saw her tormentor standing just outside the doorway. Almost 2 weeks of guilt, self-loathing, frustration, and sleep deprivation caused something inside Jessica to flip. The neutral expression on David's face was the final straw. On pure reflex, Jessica destroyed the remnants of her life. With a strength she didn't know she had, she picked up the heavy glass fruit bowl in the center of the table and hurled it towards her tormentor. It slipped in her hand at the last moment, which caused her aim to be off. In slow motion, she saw the bowl heading for the doorframe. Just before it struck, she looked at David's face. She swears now that the neutral expression turned to a smile. That was his only muscle movement, however. As the heavy bowl hit the frame, it broke into 2 pieces. One piece smashed harmlessly against the frame knot, so the other piece. It deflected about 30 degrees and hit the undamaged side of David's face. Still in slow motion, Jessica watched in horror as bright crimson blood sprayed out of a deep cut before her husband sank slowly to his knees, then fell onto his side. Like a sick film projector, life sped up again. The children, initially stunned to silence, started shouting concurrently. Jake reacted first. He jumped up and protectively stood over his father. Seeing the blood still pulsing from David's face, Jessica instinctively grabbed a hand towel and rolled it up while striding to her recumbent husband. She intended to use it to staunch the blood. Jake raised his hands to ward her off, but she determinedly pushed him backward. He fell hard. Jessica knelt down and pressed the towel into David's face. In a very ungirlish manner, Sarah tackled her mother off her father. Seeing that his angry sister was more than a match for his mother, Jake arose, went to the medicine cabinet, grabbed a sterile pad, ripped it open, and applied it gently to his father's face. Sarah screamed at Liam, "Phone emergency!" Knowing how bad this was, Jessica ran to the phone. By controlling the call, she hoped to just request an ambulance while keeping the police away. She had just put her hand on the phone when she heard Jake scream, "Use the phone upstairs, Sarah!" In a moment of clarity, Jessica realized that they'd misinterpreted her actions as her wanting to stop the phone being used. Sarah sprinted past her towards the stairs. Jessica wanted to give chase, but little Liam stopped her the only way he could. He wrapped his arms around her lower legs. Jessica wanted to take one step but fell heavily when her legs wouldn't move. She lay there, screaming hysterically. Then she removed Liam's arms, firmly stood, and ran. That's the first time I saw Jessica in the flesh-on hand covered in blood running to her car. I had just arrived to request an interview. Seeing the bloody, screaming woman, I took the liberty of inviting myself in and took over David's treatment. The ambulance arrived, followed by the police. While David was taken away, the police started asking questions. I arranged for Sarah to ring her grandmother to come and look after them. That's how I heard firsthand what had happened to David this time. As the children recounted how their mother had attacked their father, then allegedly tried to smother him and stop them from calling an ambulance, I'd interviewed enough people by now to suspect that the local police might be a little less than zealous in protecting David's interests. So I rang a contact in the state police, and within 3 hours, 2 flying squad members turned up. The flying squad are a group of police that move from town to town, accepting that the local force can sometimes go a little native. The flying squad come into a town, blitz the local bad drivers for a few days, then move on. I stayed long enough to see the children giving their statements all over again, then took Sarah and Jake to see their dad. That's when I got my only words ever from him. I took them home and bowed out. Unbeknownst to me at the time, Jessica fled to Sean's house. She was greeted at the door by his wife, Pam. Sean, thinking quickly, explained to his wife that Jessica was an employee of his with an abusive husband. The generous woman offered her house as a refuge for the night. Jessica was too distraught to go to work the next day, but Sean did, leaving the women alone. Just after lunchtime, Pam was in the kitchen but ran into the lounge when she heard a scream and a crash. Jessica was lying on the floor in a dead faint. Looking around to see what may have caused it, Pam eventually looked out the window. There was a man whose face was almost entirely covered in bandages, standing outside their fence, staring at the house. Pam waited for Jessica to start coming around, then asked what was happening. Through Jessica's incoherent mumbling, Pam caught the word husband. She called the police to remove the abusive man, then called Sean. Sean got there first and strode into the house, ignoring David to start damage control. The police arrived and recognized David. One came to the door and asked Pam if it was her. Pam innocently said yes. To her amusement, Jessica was arrested. To avoid answering difficult questions from his wife, Sean left to organize a lawyer for Jessica. He had to keep a lid on this whole mess. He went back home very soon afterward when Pam rang to say the creepy man was still staring at their house. On the way home, he hatched a plan, one that involved waiting for darkness. He kept Pam entertained all afternoon. I was at the police station after learning of the morning's drama over the police radio, trying to get details of what Jessica would be charged with. They weren't very talkative. I then spent a couple of hours trying to locate David with no luck there either. Finally, I went back to the motel and started to type up the story while eavesdropping on the police radio channel. That's how I located David just after dark. Sean must have rung the police to move David on. I heard them being dispatched to Sean's residence. I jumped in my car and got there just as the police were watching David get in his car and drive off. This guy seemed to attract trouble, so I decided to follow him. I was within sight of his house when he pulled into his driveway and painfully climbed out. I saw 2 shadows detach themselves from trees and close in behind him. One raised an arm and hit David on the back of the head with something. I didn't wait any longer but gunned the engine and bathed the scene with my headlights. I snapped a couple of photos with my ever-present camera. 2 large men ran off up the street, leaving a motionless David behind. I called the ambulance and police again and waited for poor old David to be carted off to the hospital for the 4th time in 2 weeks. I suspected that David wouldn't be able to survive many more episodes like this. What I'd witnessed wasn't the prelude to a beating, but something much more serious. I gave a statement to the flying squad police and handed over my photographs. David spent another night in the hospital while being checked out for yet another concussion. I was in court the next day when the judge arraigned Jessica for assault occasioning grievous bodily harm. The police let it be known that attempted murder might be added later. Sean posted her bail, gave her a wad of cash, and took her to their motel unit. He suggested she throw her phone away, as there was a fair chance that was how David was tracking her. He also requested that apart from at work, she stay the hell away from him. With an out-of-town reporter sniffing around, well, he just didn't need the bad publicity. Jessica was shocked. Sean was all she had left from her old life and the cause of it all going to pieces. She asked how he could treat her so badly if he loved her. Sean couldn't help the look of contempt that suffused his face. In that instant, Jessica realized that far from loving her, she'd just been a bit of fun for him on the side, a bit of fun that was now a big liability. To confirm this, Sean told her rather coldly what her life would be like if she tried to make waves for him. Then he left. He had an urgent job to do. His hired hands weren't answering their phones. Jessica stewed on the train wreck that her life had become and the fact she'd lost absolutely everything. She didn't even have a medicine cabinet full of pills or a bath to end it all in. She was cheered up somewhat 2 days later when Sean was arrested. My photographs of the night of David's final assault led to his thugs being apprehended very quickly. To save their own skin, they rolled over on Sean immediately. Now his power and influence worked against him, and he was denied bail. When my article was published in the weekly magazine that weekend, his wife left him quicker than a rat on the Titanic. The dealership survived, however, and Jessica continued her lonely existence until her trial. She brokered an uneasy deal with her mother to get her stuff from her old house, but never saw David or her children again. Jessica was honest when the police, tipped off by my article, questioned her about David's first 2 beatings, thinking they had nothing to do with her. That led to her being charged with 2 counts of failure to report a crime and as an accessory to assault. David was granted interim custody of their 3 children. He was torn about pressing charges on Jessica's direct assault of him. His mind was finally made up by child services. One particularly militant local officer took Jessica's side and started proceedings to get custody granted to her. This was despite the wishes of all 3 children. David, realizing that himself having custody was in the best interests of the kids, went ahead and pressed charges on the grounds of maximizing the chances of the correct result being forthcoming. When the child support worker persisted, David took to sitting outside her house, staring at it. Although the police moved him on, it had the desired result. Soon, neighbors reported loud arguments coming from the house. Her husband was heard to scream, "Let me get this straight. The witch ambushes the guy, fools around on him, sits back and does nothing when he's put in the hospital twice, then tries to kill him in front of the kids, and you still take her side." An hour after this exchange, the government worker was seen lugging suitcases to her car. The case was dropped. Jessica still hadn't worked up the courage to end it all when the circuit court came to town. With the evidence so overwhelming, all 4 parties pled guilty. Rick and Tom got 3 years, Jessica got 4, and Sean 8. No one was there to see Jessica taken from the dock down the special stairs to the holding cells. It wasn't until this point that the full reality hit her. She wrote a long letter to her children, apologizing for what she'd done to their family. She wrote another to David. It contained no apologies, things were way too bad for that, but did beg him to look after the children. David became somewhat of a local celebrity and had no shortage of attention from the local available ladies. He even went out on dates when family business allowed, or when Sarah and Jake gave him no choice. When one particular lady caught his eye, Sarah and Jake confronted her alone one night and gave her a thorough grilling, at the end of which they pronounced her worthy of continuing to see their courageous dad. Things are still going well with her, and Sarah is thinking of dropping hints to David about proposing. As for Sean, what can I say? He was in a 4-person cell and was quickly learning that being a small-town bully didn't amount to much in the state prison. He was also starting to feel like an unsuccessful heavyweight boxing contender. He was certainly being badly battered about the ring. A few days later, he was involved in a prison fight. Well, that was his last fight. Apparently, trying to bully a 350-pound man is never a good idea. Thank you for tuning in to this intense story of betrayal, resilience, and justice. What would you have done if you were in David's situation? Let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more shocking tales like this one. See you in the next video.